Happy April 24th. This is Tuesday, and it is Voice of Bold Business Radio live stream day. You're listening to the Culture of Humility, where Jessica Pettit is with me, and you're going to get to meet her after the introduction. Before that, when I was preparing for this show, I've done a lot of research about Jess, and I have a lot of things I want to talk about, and we never know what's going to come out of this, since sometimes what I want to talk about is not what's actually going on. And what's actually going on is more current, more potent, and more personable and necessary to hear right now than anything I could have ever planned. So welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where we get you the information that needs to be gotten as a leader so that you can increase your soft skills, increase your presence, increase your influence, and do the work that must be done so that you can achieve your goals successfully and have people that want to follow your lead and to lead effectively. Today, my husband was reading the paper. I don't read the paper. I listen to podcasts and I read blogs and I read magazines. My husband reads the paper and he comes into the kitchen and he goes, "Jess, I've got this cool cartoon." Okay. It's two pigeons and one is sitting on the other's back. And it says, "Look, Tom, I'm a passenger pigeon. You're a carrier pigeon. I don't make the rules." And I laughed out loud and I said, how cool that Scott Hilburn was going to have a cartoon published on the same day that we're talking about humility, that we're talking about the fact that there is more than meets the eye, and it starts with our own awareness, and that we can actually make the rules. I'll make sure this gets posted in the show notes so that you have access to it, provided that you're listening today instead of watching us on our live broadcast. Jessica Pettit, whom you will meet right after the open, as I mentioned a minute ago, pulls together her standards. Yes, she does. She also does stand-up comedy, which is really what I wanted to say just then. She's been doing diversity training and speaking for over 15 years now. She's participated in the diversity education, the inclusion awareness and education of many organizations across several industries. Her goal is to take abstract fear and turn them into actionable habit, which allows teams to not only work together, want to work together. With a sense of belonging and understanding, colleagues can then take more risks with their ideation, conservative, precious resources in collaboration, and maintain real connections with each other and clients over time. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Jess, I want to start with this. We get to have you join us today, not from your hometown, not from your regular office, from being on the road at a conference. And in our green room, you were talking about what you were doing, not only yesterday and today, but how it struck you and how important inclusion and diversity and humility continue to be today. Let's start with that. What have your takeaways been so far from the conference that you're at?
Sure. So full disclosure, I'm at the University of Alabama at Birmingham Medical Center for their patient experience conference. And the idea being, and this hospital is very highly ranked for satisfactory, if not above satisfactory, patient experiences, regardless of their treatment or why they came to the hospital. So they do a lot of qualitative and quantitative research to really document what a patient experiences from a parking garage all the way through their entire experience. So coming here and being able to talk about cultural humility on your show is a very good timing piece, because my biggest takeaway, specifically working with highly educated medical professionals, is that of course they have a level of competence. And when they're getting ready to engage with a patient, I think that competence often happens first. So they're kind of playing mental plinko as they're watching someone or introducing themselves to someone to solve a problem. But in order to have a very high level of patient experience, they have to set their competence aside to actually have a cultural humility-based conversation, which is a human-to-human listening, exchange of information, present conversation. And that's what really improves patient experience.
It makes me think of something that we have been, over the last 20 years, told is bad, and it's taking time. Efficiency being everything, moving things through, profitability through metrics that are hardcore is counterintuitive to what you were just talking about, this connection, human to human. Now, granted, it may not make a difference in the ROI, the metrics in the return right now. Where does it make a difference?
Well, I think being efficient, I'm a control freak, type A person, right? So being efficient is exciting, and my linen closet is amazing. And if I'm having a real conversation with someone, it's efficiency in that conversation really is about kind of getting to the end. And I think there's some competition, probably capitalistic, like winning, success, solved, fixed, connected to that kind of efficiency in conversation, but it's not humane. So one of the speakers yesterday was talking about how someone comes to the hospital complaining of leg pain. A medical professional may think like heart attacks or start checking potassium levels or something like that, where ultimately they're getting patients getting such good medical care, their life is being saved because they're treating all these other things. But if they don't actually treat the pain in the leg, not what's causing the pain in the leg, but the pain in the leg, then the patient is going to feel like they're getting their runaround. So you have to both treat what the patient is for as well as the symptoms that, because of your competency level, you're able to figure out. You have to be able to do both. And I think that it's not just related to medical care, but we could do this in a grocery store.
Absolutely. So really,
Excuse me.
Two types of thought are happening at the same time. What do I need to do cognitively behind the scenes? And what do I need to do to make this person feel like they matter, to make sure that they know that they've been seen and they are being seen and listened to, knowing that the symptom is why we're connecting typically in a problematic situation of any kind, yet the actual solution could be something totally different.
Right. And so let's put it into like leadership, co-work, supervision kind of dynamics. If you have, like, one of the things I try to do is to help leaders or supervisors find space so that their employees or team feel empowered to dream and have ideas and be creative and be innovative, even if that means risk and failure, right? Like I think that's a really important piece that isn't efficient, but is incredibly important when we're talking about conserving precious resources, team building, and working together. So if I am some jefe, some boss type person, and an employee comes up to me and is like, I want to use only red pens. And the boss just says, no, that's not allowed. But I don't understand why that might be the case. Like, if as a supervisor, I don't take the time to explain that actually Jill over in the marketing department is the person who uses red pens. And if you're using red pens, people are going to think that marketing has already seen these documents. So that's part of the reason we don't ever use red pens, because they kind of have like the monopoly on red pens inside the system. How about like you can use green or purple or something like that? Does that sound fun? But we don't often take the time to explain why. We just say no. But so then if that employee happens to be talking to an employee in marketing and they get to use red pens, now there's starting to be this like, well, why can't I use red pens? Yeah. Or worse, they deliver false information to the other employee, like, well, you're not allowed to use red pens, right? But instead of creating all of that, why don't you just slow your roll and have a conversation about what is actually happening?
Okay, so we were talking in the green room. We've all had pets in this group. I have a child, and what you're describing right now is actually also a parenting technique. I'm not sure if you knew that.
I do. You're welcome. But I actually think most leadership, parenting, consulting, coaching kind of things is all the same bucket. And we just compartmentalize it as if we're really good at parenting, but we're really bad at being a manager. And the reality is that you're probably the kind of manager that you're also a parent, or at least you could be. But we don't often think of ourselves that way.
Okay. I don't know if you guys heard this. This is worth repeating what Jess said. The kind of manager you are is the kind of parent you actually are. So if you don't like what you're seeing at home with your kids, most likely nobody's telling you what's actually going on at work, and vice versa. And I find that fascinating because I use my household as a petri dish to try new things and figure out what works and what doesn't, because there's no filters, because we know each other so well that it's okay to kind of have warts and be ugly and clumsy, as well as really succeed and support and have empathy for each other. And once I know I can do something really well there, I know I can replicate it someplace else because I've got this skill set, not only practice, I've got feedback, but we also then can go, okay, so here's what I might not be seeing. Because, like, going back to your red pen example, Jess, it's very much um, it could be tired, it could be stressed, it could be busy management at that point. And that's where, when we find ourselves not slowing down, not taking the time, that miscommunications can really fester. I mean, imagine all of the conundrum and the drama that can come around this concept of not being able to use red pens in a different department because of misinformation or wrong information. I think you bring up a really good point. And to take that further, where I'd like to go is, you know, talking about slowing down, talking about it being counterintuitive. Sure, it's counterintuitive in the moment. And one of the things that I know I subscribe to, and what I'm gathering from what I've read about you and the blog posts and what you've written, is that you also look at things in a larger rhythm or a larger arc. That just because it might not be efficient now doesn't mean it's not going to be efficient later. And in the end, the efficiency has longer term effects when we think about the longer arc.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, are you solving a short-term problem or a long-term problem? And I think we kind of wrap our brain around that one a lot in leadership positions. But I think you also have to ask, are you causing a short-term problem or are you causing a long-term problem? And you have control over that. Part of this slowing down piece, when I started writing my book, my mantra or whatever is do the best you can with what you got some of the time. And it's important in that I think we have this kind of all or nothing mindset that you have to 100% perfect 100% of the time, all the time with everything, or opt out. And if you opt out, very quickly retreat and do nothing with no one about anything ever. And the reality is that you really just are more complicated than that. So give yourself a little bit of benefit of the doubt and get a little messy and do the best you can with what you got some of the time makes you self-reflective, but also responsible for when you choose to move forward and you choose to back up.
Okay, staying right here, I'm going to restate what you said in a sense of, we don't always have to be moving forward all the time. We can be staying put. We can actually retreat. And staying put and retreating can be positive. And that comes back to your concept of enough. What makes us enough? Can you talk to us about what that means to be enough?
Yeah. So when I came up, there's kind of two pieces. So I'm going to try and do both quickly because it's
perfect.
A great show. So the first one is that I got tired of feeling like I was always failing because I wasn't extraordinary or exceptional. And I think what's important is that I deeply believe every human is actually good. Some of them are not good at being good, but generally speaking, I think people are good. I think their life has taught them that this is how they're supposed to show up. And I may agree or disagree with that, but I think people are good. The enough piece is the hardest one for me because it's actually dealing with what I already have. So instead of trying to school me more or go to different things or learn different things or get different degrees or constantly accumulating things so that I would feel better, I realized if I relaxed 2 seconds, I could actually just be enough right now. And the second piece of this is that it was actually a conversation with her. And our parents passed away when we were young. And so in kind of trying to be a parental person or figure to my brother, I did not feel adequate in this. It was a surprise that I was going to have to do this. So I read all these books and went to these retreats, and I started going to Al-Anon meetings, even though I did not qualify to be in an Al-Anon meeting. At least it was about family. I go to dinner with my brother one day, and I decide I'm going to be all vulnerable with him and explain to him I'm trying to learn how to be your older sister. And my brother puts his fork down and is like, you have been my older sister since the day I was born. Like, it's not about whether I'm excelling or failing at this job. I am already in the job. And he's like, how about if you're all worried about doing it good, how about you just, I don't know, return a phone call? That'd be enough. And it was then that I realized I had wasted almost 2 decades of being his bigger sister by trying to be better at being his bigger sister. And then I'd come back to fill in that role. But what really was is I was already in the role, just not paying attention to it. That's enough. Just return his phone call every once in a while. Poof, I became his older sister.
You know, I find this interesting because every role we find ourselves in, whether it be a pet owner, a dog owner, responsible before we're ready, like the story that you were describing, promoted outside of, we're promoted for our expertise instead of our ability to actually interact with people, happens a lot of the time. There is so much ambiguity in the world. And having that all tied up, I find, well, it's exhausting. And I'm also guilty of this, finding myself in roles. I mean, whether it's with my sisters or my place in the family dynamic, whether it's family of origin or my current family, it's kind of this cool thing. And you're right. When you stop and go, hey, I'm exhausted by this. What's actually going on? We've been trying too hard. And I know some people call that imposter syndrome. And I feel like that's partially true. I don't really feel like that's the full onus of it. So it's almost like, sure, we have self-doubt, but how does that self-doubt actually get transformed into recognizing what the thing is that we could do to be enough right now?
Well, and the other piece is the imposter syndrome. It is exactly imposter syndrome. So it can get transformed into doing something, but it can also get transformed into an excuse pattern that allows you to never do anything.
Thank you. Yes, good clarification. Yes.
So then you just become an expert in avoiding things. Like, that's how most of us navigate the planet. So stop. Some of the time, like the next time, I always use a grocery store as an example, but the next time you go to the grocery store, there are all kinds of subliminal cultural rules and expectations in a grocery store. But if you and I are standing at the cantaloupes and I am reaching for one of those cantaloupes and you swoop in, I feel entitled to that cantaloupe. Same thing happens with potato chips and nachos. Somebody always grabs the one that you were going for, and you have to be like, oh, that's so funny. No, go ahead. But you hate them. And then you open that cantaloupe and you know that other one would have been better. What would happen if we just say, like, it's funny that because we both are the same one, I'm supposed to just give it to you, and you're then the other person usually feels guilty, right, or victorious, right? It's just hope. And it's not even about the cantaloupe. It's about now the human dynamic over the fruit or over the nachos. Like, let's engage in a conversation about what's really happening and what we really feel right now. Occasionally, that would be different.
It would be incredibly different. I was having a conversation last night and in this conversation, it came up that there was this concept of, well, let's come to some consensus, because the person facilitating the discussion said, I work best with input, and I work best when we all contribute to the final goal. And somebody else in the conversation said, I just want you to tell me what to do so I can show up and support you and do what I need to do and keep going on, moving and moving. And that's actually something that, it's goes back to, maybe I'm too busy, maybe I'm too tired, maybe for whatever reason, I don't wish to be fully present here. And I'm thinking about this concept of presence, because how can we have humility if we're not present? Can we?
Sure. I mean,
okay.
Why not? I mean, I think the thing that's interesting, so here's my interesting thought. Can you have humility without being present? Sure. I think that when you are feeling more open and more present to things that are possible instead of directing or in control. It's just whether or not someone is around to witness that it matters or it doesn't matter. And you shouldn't have to need the presence of someone else to validate you or to back you up or perceive, oh, look how humble you're being right now. But we often need it occasionally to like keep us on track. But when you're used to it and you kind of know what that feeling is, I think you can start doing it by yourself and you can realize what you're doing. Because you also, I mean, the beginning class here is being humble with other humans. Right. The advanced class is having some humility with yourself.
So let's stick. Okay, let's stick with that first part. The 100 class, being humble with other people. That does require another person to be present. And what you're saying is then, which is something, that I subscribe to, is it's what you do when nobody's looking that really defines who you are. And you're saying being humble also fits into that category. So I'm wrapping my head around this because it is an interesting thought. And it also brings up this concept of, I don't know if you've ever heard this quote, you can either be the light or reflect the light. I'm going to have to look up who said that. And it's interesting because when you said that, my initial reaction was, what? I have to do something and I can have something without other people being present? What is that? Because I reflect light. I see the light, I see what it is, and I bring it back out for other people. It very rarely starts here for me to light for other people to also light their light from. Does this make sense?
Sure.
So here we are. I'm like, oh, I'm having a reaction to that. And I'm not sure I like that. However, I agree with you in the sense that even though it's hard for me, yes.
It's about giving yourself credit and allowing yourself credit, right? So prepping for the show. If you prepped, so when you said you prepped for this show with me.
Yeah.
So in doing whatever prep you did, this is now a George Holman's quote. There's no selfless act. So when you're prepping for me and you're reading my stuff or getting used to like what kind of questions you're going to ask for this interview, there has to be some element of you actually being interested in the guest and what your audience or what you yourself might actually learn from this interview. Otherwise, in my opinion, you would not have a compelling show. You have a very compelling show. There's some, in my opinion, some degree of humility on your side. Like you said at the top, we'll see where this conversation goes. Instead of it being super controlled and super like, I've been doing this show forever, I'm very confident, this is exactly what's going to happen. That super rigidness that does exist on some shows. However, you have to take what the humility involved in like, let's see where this goes, I'm interested, and you overlay it with your experience and your competence. It's that mixture of doing both. So I use the metaphor of riding two horses at once. So I am a solo entrepreneur. I have to constantly tell people how amazing I am because they have to pay for me to come. They should buy my book. And if they want, they can stand in line and I'll autograph them, right? So that ego side of me has to be present in order for me to do my job. But if the other horse of the like, I'm just trying it out. I came up with this new thing. I wrote this book because I got burnt out and I didn't know what to do. And I thought maybe somebody else is similar, so maybe they'd learn from me. Like that humility horse and this ego horse is what we're actually always all doing. So then the meta piece of this is that can I selflessly be reflecting and learning and open to myself when I am being self-reflective, taking self-responsibility and self-assessing what my patterns are, and notice and be kind and compassionate with myself. So level 100 is practicing doing that with other people. Right. I think the advanced class is doing that with yourself. For some, though, maybe the for yourself is the easy part, but actually taking it out onto the streets is the more advanced part. I don't know.
Oh, okay. I can totally see that because for me, the more advanced part is in the self-reflection. I talk to think. And so in my talking to think, when I'm talking, I can do some really great self-assessment and catch some things, but I can't catch it all. And so being able to be reflective and very open with somebody else to go, here's what I'm seeing. Is there anything that I'm missing? What are you hearing in my language? What are the things that you know from your experience and your expertise that might be useful for me to filter into what I'm working on in this think time, in this planning time. All right. And you do this a lot. I really think everybody here needs
I try to.
I think everybody here needs to subscribe to your blog at least. I know when you put things out, every single one of your articles, you're doing some sort of people watching. And we think we people watch, and I don't think people watch until they've read your blog and actually are starting to ask different questions. And this becomes where I know every single one of us can increase our personal awareness, increase our awareness to others, is by thinking about certain things when we stop and look to listen. What would those things be for you? What would you say we need to make sure, and I'm using the word need here on purpose, to get a full picture and question our rules, if you will?
Sure. So first I would say I'm not like a black belt at this. I just noticed that I need to be doing this. And I have the privilege of people listening to me, right? Or reading my newsletters or whatever.
Yes.
So I created my newsletter. The title of my newsletter is Another Isolated Incident. And what I thought was fascinating about this is, by definition, you cannot have another isolated incident. If it was an isolated incident, it would have happened once. But if you have another one, then literally you are admitting this is a pattern, but I believe you are not taking the responsibility for the pattern. So where I first heard the phrasing, another isolated incident, some of you may remember this, and I'm dating myself, but when Barack Obama was president and his former professor was arrested breaking into his own house because he had forgotten his house keys. Do you remember this?
I do.
And a neighbor called the police on the neighbor, and then eventually that police officer and the professor had a beer in the garden with Barack Obama. So I don't want to talk about the MPs, that's a different show. But a newscaster was explaining the story, as a journalist would do, and called it another isolated incident relating to someone calling the police on someone who looked like they were breaking into their house. No one ever seemed to notice or ask that a neighbor called the police on their neighbor. Like, do you recognize your neighbor? Like, I mean, I think a lot of us don't really talk to our neighbors, which is a whole nother show as well. But I know what they look like. I know what kind of car they drive. Like, I don't understand. But another isolated incident is that a black man looked like they was breaking into a house who conveniently would have been owned by a black man. Maybe that would have connected in the neighbor's head, but it didn't. It looked isolated because they're not used to necessarily black men being in that neighborhood. They called the police. Another isolated incident is exactly about noticing what's going on. What questions are you not asking? What could be happening? And is this yet another pattern that I'm not willing to take responsibility for because I haven't paid attention to it in a way where I need to be claiming my own responsibility for it? That's what I do.
We have a question from Jack in our audience, and he wants to be sure he wants to know, how do I know that, oh, okay, let me try this again. I'm totally botching this twice. Third time's a charm. How do I know the difference between humility and low self-worth?
Oh, I think that is a very smart question, and I'm not entirely certain I'm qualified to answer it. But I would say, do I want to eat emotions after one of them? So when I am depressed, and I have depression issues, when I am depressed or when I am anxious or certainly feeling low, usually room service or some kind of processed sugar immediately follows that feeling. When I am feeling humble or I'm coming from a place of humility, I'm interested, I'm intrigued, I'm open to learning, and who knows what's about to happen. For me, it is a very different emotional set that I can literally feel very different, whether it's conscious or unconscious. To me, that.
You are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where we're talking with our special guest, Jessica Pettit. And we're talking about the culture of humility. So you're in the right place. if you want to have conversations about problem solving, if you want to have conversations about increasing your own personal awareness to lead more effectively, and figure out how to build the culture and include the people that you would like to include around you to make you smarter, to make them smarter, and for everybody to grow together. That's interesting what you were talking about just now about do you want to eat it afterwards? I also struggle with that and know exactly when something is happening. It's like, okay, there's a different thing. So I got to be with this because no other thinking is going to occur until I honor this little piece of who I am and what I'm doing with the emotions that I'm feeling. And coming back to culture in awareness, I'm thinking about what you were talking about in regards to humility and culture. And what does it look like? If I am in an organization, small, medium, or a big company, how do I know by looking at somebody that they have humility and that they would be somebody to study and to use as potentially reaching out as an informal mentor?
How do you know that?
Yeah. What does it look like? What does it feel like from the outside?
I'm not entirely sure, I guess is
Sure.
my real answer. I think that I know that there have been times very recently where I have been asked to be someone's mentor, and I'm like, what? I'm a mess. What? I'm certain you can do better. What are you thinking? To me, that's not being humble. If anything, that is not like accepting a compliment. I think this came from one of my therapist's homework assignments. I'm not sure. But one of the things that I had to do for about 6 months until I began to notice a difference was that people would thank me and I would deflect it back to them and be like, oh, no, thank you so much. And what I'm doing is robbing them of the opportunity of giving me a gift by deflecting it back to them. Now I can say, oh, thank you very much. By the way, I really like your sweater. Like, I'm giving a gift back. I can do that. But the key is the 3 beats before that, where I really accept it and thanks. As a professional speaker, I get applause. Not every time, but a lot of the times. And sometimes they even stand up. And in the United States, that's considered like extra bonus applause. And on the occasions where that happens, my immediate response is, run, get off the stage. Because it's so much positive intention coming at me that's really appreciating what I have just done, that it's almost like staring into the sun. And so part of humility isn't like waiting to go blind, but is opening yourself up enough to realize that you have done something this positive and receive the accolades relevant to that. When we start going back to mentors and mentees, there are a lot of times where I'm like, well, I never had a good mentor. Every boss I ever had is somebody I wish I wasn't like. I feel entitled to a mentor. People should want me to be their mentee because I'm amazing. Like this attitude and persona, like this font, right, is not coming from a cultural humility place. This is coming from a place that needs to eat some cookies. So you are in charge of noticing those different pieces. So there's a place of being honored, being asked to be someone's mentor, but there's also the honor of asking someone else to be their mentor. Then there's this very strange situation where you're really drawn to someone and I have asked them if they would like for me to be their mentor because I would really like to work with them and like help develop them, etc. It's 3 very different personalities or very different fonts that are required, and you can screw all those up in different ways. But all coming from a place of cultural humility, you're open to, you're open to rejection, you're open to like, no, actually, really, I'm not interested, or you're open to even giving someone like, I really can't do that at this time. But the intention is coming from a place that is humble and is honoring the gifts of the conversation, regardless of which direction it's going from, that is cultural humility. That's listening. And even if it doesn't work out for a mentor or a mentee, I think that it is great role modeling of how to do that. And that you can be a teacher from a place of humility, not just from a place of confidence.
Ooh. Okay, so it's interesting because in that particular sense, it sounded like competence could also become ego. Did I pick up on that correctly?
Maybe. I mean, I'm at a medical conference, so it's highly possible.
Yeah. Okay. And then before you were talking about the two horses, right? And one of the horses was you've got to have the ego and the courage and the confidence to say, hey, this is why, this is what, this is how. And yes, you want me. Yes, you need me here. And whether that's me as an individual or me as an organization or me as a product or a service, it's all the same. And you touched on this cool thing about entitlement. I think people must want me. And if they don't, right? Yeah, exactly. So where does that entitlement come from? Have you figured that out or gotten even closer to a root cause of one of the things that's pervasive in our communities here?
What's fun about entitlement is sometimes you just are. Sometimes I think you are entitled to things. And I think you need to be prepared for other people not feeling the same way. That's it. I really don't know that it's necessarily a humongoid thing. This is a random thing, but when I was thinking about it, customer service came up immediately. There are things that people feel entitled to that they did not pay for. They are not entitled to this. You are wrong. That's not true. There are other things that are part of this experience, right? So if I am out to dinner, and let's say that I'm at a pizza joint, and I decide I do not want pizza, I actually want Chinese food. Chinese food is not on the menu at this restaurant. Well, I'm at a restaurant and I demand my Chinese food. You're in the wrong place. Like, I mean, good for you. Not gonna happen here, right? But if I'm at a pizza joint and I have mild expectations of like a fork. Now that fork might be metal, it might be plastic. I consider that a big distinction if I'm leaving a Yelp review. Plastic utensils versus metal utensils. It's a completely different restaurant experience for me. So it's a metal utensil place. So I get my metal fork, I'm at a fancy place. And let's say that the fork didn't get clean in the Hobart, right? Like I waited tables forever. Spinach is notoriously stuck on forks. All right, great. Excuse me, can I get a clean fork? If they have forks, I am actually entitled to a clean fork. They intended to give me a clean fork. They just didn't notice this piece of whatever dried on the fork. That's still entitlement. And yes, absolutely, you are entitled to the expectations that we intend to give you. But can you slow down enough in a conversation and separate the two? If you're demanding Chinese food from an Italian food restaurant, that's your fault.
Which comes back to the lack of awareness, which comes back to the fact where chips get formed. So chips on shoulders. It's interesting for me to think about that. And I'm going back to the people who I feel like they're entitled to things like wanting Chinese food at an Italian restaurant. And every single one of those people I know have a chip on their shoulder because, going back to the very first example you gave, the pain in their leg was not addressed, even though their life was saved. There was a disconnect there. Mm-hmm. And so when we find ourselves demanding, and maybe this is the key in exploring this with you, when we find ourselves demanding, or our guard gets up, or the little hairs on the back of our neck, they don't raise because we're scared or we might be in danger. They're raising as our blood pressure goes up and our face is turning red. Maybe an indication that the demand is actually taking over, which creates the negative kind of entitlement that we're used to hearing about when we hear the word entitled.
Yeah. And if we keep using this restaurant thing as a metaphor.
Sure.
So when I was in the Peace Corps in Bulgaria, and one of my favorite restaurants that I would take guests when they came to visit me had very particularly strange things about their menu. So it was not uncommon to have a 30-page menu, but only 4 items were available. That was not uncommon. Okay, great. That's a Bulgarian restaurant. Deal. Because one day, I remember my best friend was visiting from college, and we went, and she just wanted scrambled eggs. So in Bulgarian, I'm explaining to the waitress, can I get 2 scrambled eggs? And the waitress says, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have scrambled eggs today. Now, I would typically be used to that. Except the waitress kept going, and she's like, we only have omelets. Now, in case any of the listeners are not people who cook, an omelet starts off as scrambled eggs, and then you add innards to it, and you flip it in half, and then flip the whole thing over, and then, so it is like deluxe scrambled eggs, basically.
It's like an egg pancake with stuffing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, in that moment, my best friend is visiting from the United States. This is one of her first meals in Bulgaria at a restaurant. And so in that moment, very patiently in Bulgarian, I asked the waitress if I could then order an omelet without anything inside of it. And she said no. They didn't know how to make omelets like that.
Right?
Do you argue and explain this makes absolutely no sense? Or do you tell your friend that's not happening?
I think it depends on your mood and your past experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If that waitress is somebody who I've already been annoyed by, eventually I'm going to have pile up, and someday I'm going to go off.
Right.
It may or may not be the same person. It may just be somebody that reminds me of that person, or it could be completely unrelated. It's just hackling in there until I can't take it anymore. Right. It has been over 20 years, and I'm actually still annoyed at that story. But I informed in the moment, I lived in that neighborhood, and I informed my best friend, don't ask, you can't have scrambled eggs. What else do you want?
That's interesting. Just the other day, I was in a conversation, and in this conversation, I ended up having to share news. Just here's the research that I did. Here's the sharing that occurred. And all of a sudden there was this volcano. I don't know. No, it was more like a fire hose because the volcano goes up and explodes. This was just like straight at me. And of all of this craziness. And this was all by email. So I just politely wrote back and I said, please don't shoot the messenger. I'm just sharing what I learned to keep the conversation open because you may have information I don't. Is there anything you want to add to this? And anyway, it escalated and continued. And finally I was like, hey, not sure what's going on here or why this is happening to me right now. This is not right. This is not right. Mm-hmm. Like kind of like what you were just alluding to. At some point, somebody was going to get the outburst of the fact that there's an annoyance going on. And thankfully, it was enough. It took a lot, several communication points, phone calls, phone tag, to be able to get to the point where this person went, oh, I came on too strong. Oh, I'm reacting to something that has nothing to do with this other person. In this case, it happened to be me.
Which goes back to taking responsibility of those particular sittings, right? Like sometimes you can do it in the moment. Sometimes you have to reflect on it and come back from it later.
That's exactly right. And I have to tell you, the reflection part can be harder and easier to avoid because why would you want to look at a not good situation going forward? And I don't know about you. My thoughts about that are, well, it's the hardest situations that we have the most to learn from. We don't ever have to agree. We can just understand there are differences and what caused those differences.
Yes, and you take those situations into the next one.
Okay.
Right? So the irrational frustration I experienced with that waitress 20 plus years ago, that is not an isolated incident. That has happened again, right? And every time I get frustrated, I am zapped back to the first time it ever happened that I noticed. And then all the accumulation happens. Now, my job is to be responsible enough that I don't go berserk on someone who just experienced it this first time.
Right.
So my bank, I live in a very small town, and my bank, one of the times I went because I needed to open a personal checking account, long story. And the woman who was being helped before me obviously was riding a motorcycle. and needed a debit card in order to buy a part on her motorcycle that just broken down, and she needed to get this all done for her to get to work on time. Nobody in the bank is going to be late for work. They're at work. But the woman on the motorcycle was like, hurry up. And like the debit card machine was being slow and all this stuff. And I watched her like be calm and slowly get berserk until she like stormed out of the bank with her debit card, but late, right? So now she's under pressure to get whatever part to get to work on time. That is not other people's problem. Okay, so then it was my turn to be helped. And I said, before we get started, do you need to take like a moment because that got escalated? I want to make sure that you're like, okay, I'm fine sitting here making you look busy if you just want to like get yourself together. She was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And then she's very helpful for me. She helped me, whatever. I did this stuff. I had to do some signatures. I was leaving town, whatever. She's like, when you get back in town, come back by. I'll pick this right back up. I was like, great. So I was gone, but I was gone for like 6 weeks. So I come back to the bank. I'm sitting in the chairs. There's that woman. She walks by me and she's like, what do you need? And I was like, hi, just back in town, following directions. And she goes, I'm sure they can help you at the counter. And then walks by. And I was like, oh, she must have had a bad day. I'll just sit here and be polite. She'll eventually remember. I mean, I'm kind of a unique looking person. She'll eventually remember and then we'll be fine. So I sit there. 20 minutes later, she comes back out and she's like, you're still here. And I was like, yeah, hi. So could be wrong, but I believe about 6 weeks ago, we were working on something and you recommended that I come back and work directly with you so you could pick it back up. And she goes, fine.
Whew.
So we tiptoe over to her desk. I sit down and I'm like, I know I live in a really small town, but 6 weeks is a long time. You maybe don't remember, but I was opening some accounts. You see people all the time. I don't know at what point this is going to sound familiar to you. And I don't exactly know what you need to do. You just told me to come back in. And she's like, well, how am I supposed to help you if you don't even know what you need?
What?
So I was like, ma'am, I am following your directions. I'm happy to come back at a different time. This is what we were doing. This is where we were. Then I had to go out of town and you recommended that I come back and ask for you. If this is a bad time, I'm more than happy to come back. And she's looking through and I saw a folder with my name on our desk. And I was like, oh, that's my name. I bet that might jog your memory. She looks at it and then like becomes delightful. Starts playing in the computer and the systems are really slow. And she starts getting back and she's all the way back into like 2010 records. And I was like, I've only been gone for 6 weeks. Like, I think you're probably digging a bit further back than you need to. Perhaps you have the wrong account number or something. Not even kidding. She shoves back from her desk and says, I feel attacked. I cannot work like this anymore. And I was just like, you know what? I think I'm going to go to a different branch. Like, I hope you have a better day. Grabbed my stuff, walked out. But I felt like that motorcycle girl, right?
Yes.
I was like, so maybe there is a pattern. So I go to a different branch, I get taken care of, and I ask at that branch, do you know this person? Like, is there something wrong? Is there something I need to know about? Has this happened before? What's going on? They were like, oh no, she's utterly delightful. Okay, so I know it's a very long story, but in the moment, I have a choice. I can switch banks, I can hate on her, I can feel compassion for her, or I can take responsibility for whatever it is that I did that triggered whatever it is that happened. I decided to write her a note. I wrote her a note and apologizing because nobody should feel abused at work. That is something I believe in. Do I feel like I abused her at work? No. But she said she felt abused at work. I wrote her a note, mailed it off. I feel like I've done what I can do. I also do not go to that branch very often anymore. And I never heard anything. That's where the entitlement piece happens, is that I'm not entitled to a response. I'm not entitled to going to that branch and her giving me peanut butter M&Ms. But I'm responsible for something that, whether intended or not, had the impact of her feeling abused at work. If I need banking done, I will go someplace else.
Interesting. Okay. The concept of responsibility is very clear here. The other thing is the difference between just general kindness as versus entitlement. And you're right. When we send a thank you note, there is a part of us that may be like, we expect the next time we talk to this person or send an email that they reference that thank you note or that apology letter. And I hear what you're saying, and that is totally and completely irrational. We all are seeing a lot of people every day. We all have a ton of things going on in our own mind, let alone in our own universe, outside of what we do when we do our work and provide the service or the product that we're doing. And to be able to be part of that, to witness, and then to move on might just be exactly what needed to happen.
Mhm.
Okay, we're talking around this topic, and the good news is we have a question from Carla, and she is very interested in knowing what's like the first step or the starting point to building a culture of humility. In light of all of what we've talked about, what would you say would be that starting point?
It's the hardest answer. And so, Carla, I'm sorry, but here's the answer. Start doing it. Regardless of your power or your position in the hierarchy, start recognizing when you are or when you are not showing up with a degree of humility, and try to increase the opportunities where you are showing up with a degree of humility. And just role modeling it shifts all of the dynamics in office. So they might have to go through all different kinds of rumor mills to figure out what you're trying to do. Or, Carla went to some conference and found out this new term. Like, don't come in and shove it down everyone's throats and paint murals and get everyone matching t-shirts. Just start doing it. And the humility it takes to just practice without permission, validation, or perception of other people will shift that culture into other people starting to do it. It doesn't even necessarily need a name or matching t-shirts.
Usually the best results probably are without them, would be my guess.
I wish I had evidence that matching t-shirts like killed baby seals or something, because I feel like we'd make less superfluous t-shirts. I do not have that evidence, but just stop making matching t-shirts.
Yeah, and just do the work, take the action, take responsibility. We've been talking about self-awareness. We've been talking about responsibility. We've been talking around, yet doing very good at talking about inclusion and diversity, in the sense that we're starting with ourselves or we're starting with others, and then working on the opposite and having those two levels to work with. It sounds easy. We all know it's hard. Can you share with us why it's bold to take the step to work on this awareness, to become more aware of our diversity and more inclusive of it?
It's the one last thing most of us haven't tried. That's why it's bold, because it might actually result in results. And some of us, no matter how many t-shirts and bumper stickers are on our Subarus, we aren't necessarily prepared for the results that we say we want. Because somewhere in there, we feel like we have to give something up. We do not at all. As privileged identity folks, we do not have to give anything up. We're just inviting other people around. We're not disinviting ourselves. And the boldest thing you can do is the right thing. There is no right way to do the wrong thing, ever.
You heard it here. This is Jessica Pettit, and we are coming to the end of this edition of Culture of Humility, program 143. You're going to find the program notes later today, maybe tomorrow morning, on the voiceofboldbusiness.com/P143. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 143. You can also search for Jessica Pettit to find the program that she's been on. Hello. If you have not laughed, I actually had to mute myself at one point. I was laughing so hard. I didn't want to laugh over Jess. So share your comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us your experiences, because together we are shaping what it means to lead, what it means to have leadership, and more importantly, when we share our experiences, we realize that we are not alone and we have something to learn as well as something to give. So thank you very much for being here today, and make sure that you do the work and you are working from a culture of humility.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.